Hello and welcome. I'm Bénédicte de Montlaur, the CEO of World Monument Fund. It's so wonderful to see so many of you joining us today for this first event in our new series, Heritage Now. Heritage Now will be a series of conversations exploring the nexus between cultural heritage and contemporary events and politics. Today we're going to discuss the future of Beirut after the terrible blast that tore apart the city on August 4th. This was such a tragedy. According to the World Bank, the damages are evaluated at about $3.8 to $4.6 billion. And cultural heritage is one of the most impacted economic sectors along with housing and transport. More than 170 people died. 8,000 buildings were impacted, including 640 historic structures on those most vibrant neighborhoods in Beirut. Who is going to rebuild this city? Is it possible? What is the role of the various actors, the government, the international community, the civil society, organizations like us, and all of you who are viewers today? So to explore these questions, we have three fantastic speakers that I'm honored to welcome. So first of all, we have Dr. George Arbid, who is an architect. He's a founding member and director of the Arab Center for Architecture in Beirut. Muna Hallak is a Beirut-based architect, heritage preservation activist, and director of the Neighborhood Initiative at the American University of Beirut. And finally, Nadine Labaki is an award-winning director and actress. And many of her movies, including Caramel and Capernaum, and if you haven't watched those movies, I highly encourage you to do so because they are fantastic and they virtually transport you immediately to Beirut, were set in those exact neighborhoods where the blast happened. They were affected by it. So thank you so much to the three of you for joining us today. To all our viewers, I would like also to thank the Consulate General of Lebanon in New York for partnering with us, as well as Untapped Cities. And before we begin, I want to tell you that we will take some question and answers at the end of this discussion. So don't hesitate to type them in the chat, and we will try at the end of the discussion to go through as many of them as possible. So first of all, let's get acquainted to Beirut, because perhaps some of our viewers have not visited this extraordinary city. So I would like to ask you, the three of you, to share with us what is your most cherished monument in Beirut. So maybe I will start with you, Muna. What is your favorite monument in Beirut?
My favorite monument in Beirut carries the name of the city. It's called Beit Beirut, and it's an old building, 1927 building that's located on the demarcation line that cut the city in two for 15 years during the Civil War. And I fought 27 years to preserve it, and today it's starting to become the museum of memory of the city of Beirut. And now we have created, with the blast, another painful memory.
Oh, thank you. And for you, Nadine, what is your favorite monument in Beirut?
Actually, for me, it's there isn't one specific monument. It's actually a whole neighborhood, which is the neighborhood of Jemaise and Maram Khail. For me, I consider them as these neighborhoods as monuments. They were my favorite parts of the city, and unfortunately, they were the most affected by the blast.
Yeah, and you captured these neighborhoods very well in your movies. I was just watching Caramel, and it transported me to these neighborhoods. And for you, George, what is your favorite monument in Beirut?
My favorite monument is not built yet because Beirut is a vibrant city and in continuous change. But I have fond memories of the City Palace Cinema, the sort of egg that everybody knows. And not necessarily for its architecture. It's because my parents used to buy for us these great sweets. It had the Samadi shop on the ground floor. And they used to buy the knefe, which is one of my favorite sweets. So Beirut has to do with taste as well.
Thank you, George. You're already transporting me to Beirut. And I think for many of our viewers, like they know that Beirut has been so affected by political turmoil, by war, and that so many buildings have been destroyed. But I guess many people don't know about the architecture of Beirut, the many layers of architecture, exceptional architecture that is there to be found. So can you give us, as an architect, a quick overview of the architecture of Beirut?
It will be my pleasure. Let me share my screen. Okay. I guess you're on.
Yes.
Okay, great.
If you can enlarge your PowerPoint, that would be great. Yes, that's it.
That's it, okay.
Yes, perfect. Thank you, George.
Okay, great. Oh, my pleasure. So this is Beirut. It's mostly a 20th century city, although there are traces from prehistoric times. And it is a city that has been changing itself very much from epoch to epoch. And it is actually a very layered city. It developed mostly in the 19th century when the road to Damascus was set. And of course, later with the port as well. And one could argue that the port almost made the city and the port almost killed the city, but I'm sure it will never die. So I would like to take you on this journey. This is the neighborhood that we will be talking about most. Of course, it's not only Mar Mikhail and Ashrafieh, it goes from Zat al-Blad to Burj Hamoud. But I wanted to start with this image that tells you about the different layers. And I start here with these famous houses that we like to call the Lebanese house, which is a house influenced by many, many, many places and many styles. And it became some sort of archetype. And unfortunately, during the blast, a lot of these houses were demolished. Here we are in the 1920s with the French mandate when the central district was developed in the Foch Alembi district with these alignments of stone buildings with these galleries, arched galleries. And this sort of local or arabesque art deco, I would say. But Beirut is not only made of these very, very ordered streets. It is also made of these houses with gardens in front of them. We are here in the 1930s and the city is kind of making itself. And the buildings started to rise, of course, in the 1940s, keeping with the same central hall. Is very typical of the place. And we have these alignment of buildings from the 40s and 50s changing itself. So you can see here that these buildings have all the central hall type, but they're starting to lose their crafts in the arches, but they're gaining with these terraces, large and larger terraces, and they are gaining what I call a Darwinian evolution of the species with these sort of bay windows that are protruding from the facade, because now you have buildings that are aligned and you have buildings facing them. So the model itself is changing to adapt to the new conditions. And you have the new commercial streets, of course, due to the port and all the commercial activity of Beirut. So you have these shops on the ground floors and you have the different styles cohabitating in the city. You also have a lot of these, what I call B-series buildings. Like you have in cinema, you have B-series films. So I don't think we should be talking most of iconic buildings in the city, but about the fabric of the city and the normal buildings of the city. And I think all of these should be preserved, and we will talk about this in the discussion. For example, this building was planned for demolition. Unfortunately, the Directorate General of Antiquities decided that even buildings like this can be coined as heritage buildings and it will be preserved. Modern buildings also have their place in the city, such as these. More spectacular designs also have their place, like these buildings on stairs in the Jemaisi district, on the Vendôme in Mar Mikhail district. The 1950s saw also the construction of buildings with terraces all around, but mostly with these protective devices. So the Beirut architecture has always been also an example of sustainable design, even way before the word was coined. and of course we talk about it a lot, but if we look at all these buildings, they were soundly built, and you have hundreds and hundreds of these buildings with these sun protecting devices. So this gave to Beirut, like the geography, climate gave to Beirut its taste, and very sophisticated designs as well. Of course, Beirut is known also for the hotels and buildings lining the Corniche, starting from the 50s, facing the sea. Iconic buildings like this one on the Corniche. Buildings using the previous model with the outdoor stairs, and I will show some of these outdoor stairs later in a couple of minutes. So this is a building of the 50s, perpetuating the model of the street going up to the buildings like a public stair. Schools, university buildings, schools, religious buildings of all sorts, modern buildings, even the concrete brutalism of the 1970s. Then came the war of 1975 with the tabula rasa. So this was more a tabula rasa than a reconstruction project. Everything in this plan that was studied by Heiko Schmidt, a researcher, everything in blue was demolished after the war. And we sincerely hope that this mistake will not be happening again. And I call this the amnesic phoenix. We have this myth of the phoenix rising, but unfortunately it rises without memory. So we went on demolishing all these masterpieces of architecture, whether traditional or modern. And then in the construction, we made a huge mistake of replacing buildings with the pastiche of buildings, pastiche of historical reference and pastiche of modern architecture. So we went on building like that, fake old architecture. Then came the blast of 4 August 2020. And this is what I will be speaking about now in the last 4 or 5 minutes. We have organized ourselves within a group called the BBHR, and I will show you the neighborhoods that people are surveying now, and this is what I'm sure your audience is interested in. Here we have the neighborhood of Montlaur and Cherished. You can see that some buildings are still within gardens, whereas you have large buildings like the Électricité du Liban that was severely hit, but it can be saved as well. These are the iconic mansions of Cherished and Mar Mikhael and the district. But I want to speak even more about these, again, normal buildings. What makes the cultural landscape, the cultural urban landscape of Beirut, that is mostly in this area on a hill going down to Beirut. So you have the stairs, several entrances to buildings. You have mundane additions to traditional architecture that still work. You have these public stairs. So the idea of living along with the street is very much still a practice in the neighborhood. And this reminds you maybe of the buildings I showed in the 50s earlier that keeps this going. It's a layered city. It's a layer on top of a layer. You can see here the outdoor spaces, space between buildings that are as important to preserve as is the elegant architecture. You have the stairs, extremely important public spaces, and it shows the configuration of the topography. Outdoor spaces in connection with the streets. People live on their balconies still in this neighborhood, whereas in other neighborhoods, they live in these glass boxes. There is a huge garden in the area that has to be preserved. We can talk about this later in the discussion because there was a project with a highway cutting it in the middle, and fortunately it will be stopped. So this is an opportunity also to offer a new garden to the city that badly needs it. And the World Monument Fund supported the campaign for this. Save Beirut Heritage was also, if you remember, Bénédicte, it was the association that applied for the Hnaine to save the Hnaine house and Dalye with other people. And I will end here with these juxtapositions. It is made of layers, as you can see. This is in the area as well. These are our offices, the Arab Center for Architecture. And this is our website. And if anybody wants to talk to us later more about it, we can do that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Georges, for giving us such an extensive and to the point presentation of this of the architecture. It's so multi-layered. It's so interesting. As you say, it's one city on top of another, And we can see that there is so much left and so much to preserve. And it really gives me the chill, and I want to go to Beirut immediately, and not only because of the architecture, but also because of the people who live there. Because what we maybe didn't see in your picture is the life. Like this architecture goes with the life of these neighborhoods. And I think that there is no one who can talk better about that than Nadine, because one of her many talents as a film director is to capture the soul of Beirut, this very particular soul of Beirut. So Nadine, can you tell us about that? And can you tell us about the impact of the explosion? We heard many people saying, well, this is the last drop, we cannot take it anymore, we are leaving. Do you think that is so? And what was the impact of this blast on this very special soul of Beirut?
The first thing that struck me after the blast, I was not in Beirut. We have a house in Beirut, but we were not in Beirut when the blast happened. So we waited until, because we were a bit far, so we waited until the next day to come to Beirut and understand the impact of this devastation. And the first thing that struck me when we were driving and looking at all those buildings is how human they looked. The buildings looked like humans, like human faces with their, mouth wide open, like freezed in time, traumatized faces, because, most of them, especially the old houses, had this hole in the middle. So for me, they really looked like faces. They looked like, those tall buildings looked like frail skeletons, also freezed in time in a certain position, like they were crying for help or angry with what has happened. What happened was such a devastation and such an injustice that you feel like almost the stone felt it. So for me, it was, this is what, in that sense, I felt like the soul of the city had left it in a way. And I hope it will come back one day, because there was also this feeling that, especially the places like the neighborhoods like Cherished and Marmkhair and all of those neighborhoods where there was a lot of traditional old houses and old buildings, you feel like there was this, it was not only an aesthetical or something beautiful for the eye to see, but it created this whole neighborhood life, community life, just by the way they were built with, those balconies, those porches. It allowed people to actually communicate with each other, converse with each other. It had this diversity, this contradiction. You could see, students that's living next to old couples, or artists living next to traditional artisans. There was this sort of neighborhood life, community life, that unfortunately is now completely devastated and destroyed. And I was particularly in love with Beirut and with those neighborhoods. That's why I shot Caramel there, and every time I'm drawn to these places, I don't know, maybe it's about the history they hold, or the memories they hold, or the secrets they hold. You can see stories in the cracks of the walls. You can see, that's why it was so precious and so amazing to preserve. Unfortunately, with everything that happened and with the blast that happened, it's completely decimated, completely devastated. So I don't know now we have a huge task, which is not only this time, it's not about maybe, you know, before the 4th of August, it was more about restoring or preserving. Now it's not anymore about that, it's about rebuilding, because most of them have completely disappeared. They're not here anymore. They have vanished. So now we really have to rebuild. And it's, so like you said, we're gonna need a lot of money to be able to rebuild. But at the same time, I haven't become cynical yet. I haven't decided that, you know, it's over. I still have hope. I still have hope that maybe this time we're gonna be able to not only bring back what disappeared, what has vanished, the same way they were, but also rethink it in a more sustainable way and more energy efficient way, and creating more green spaces, taking advantage of rooftops and spaces that were, you know, turned into something that was not like you know, parking lots or not being used, places that were not being used the right way, but in imagining it the right way. And I'm always dreaming. I don't have, of course, the technicalities, and I don't know, it's not my field. Maybe some of you are a little bit also surprised that I am maybe participating in this kind of talk, but I mean, I have a dream of maybe having some sort of a master plan where everything is really in the right place and studied, something that is completely like having an overview of this whole city and how it can look like. And also, of course, bringing back its soul and and its identity, and what we all are you know, in love, why we are all in love with this neighborhood.
Thank you, Nadine. And I think you have your whole place in this panel just because of what you just said. You're the perfect example of Lebanese resiliency and also inspiration. If we don't have dreams, if we don't have an aspiration, then we don't build anything. But so, and it's a perfect transition to Muna. How are we going to do that? How are we going to rebuild it with all this ambition? And I think one of the things that makes Beirut and Lebanon very special in the Middle East is also the strength of its civil society. And that's very important, especially now that Lebanon is going through this major political crisis. So Muna, you are at the center of this civil society. Can you tell us about like how people mobilize themselves after the blast? And do you think the civil society in Beirut in particular is strong enough to rebuild those neighborhoods in an even better way than it was before?
Of course, I think no other country other than Lebanon would be living like we are living today after 2 months of the biggest blast, almost third biggest explosion in the world. We are such a strong civil society and strong individuals, and we have a strong faith in our country no matter what. And if you can start my presentation. As you can see here, we're going to start with some photos by George Hazar that show the impact of the explosion on Beirut. You can see that the explosion damaged not only the heritage buildings, but also the modern buildings. So it's the impact was huge all over. Buildings from the 1910s, 1930s, 1970s were equally damaged, equally destroyed. Of course, the heartbreaking photos are those of the heritage buildings, the 1910s and pre-1910s, where you can see that that our traditional architecture has been totally damaged and wrecked. people rallied exactly the second day after the explosion. We took the shock in, and then we rallied to the streets. People from all the professional backgrounds, students, NGOs, even normal people just left. Everybody wanted to help, to see what we can do to help the people whose homes and workplaces have been completely destroyed. So these are scenes that we walked through on the 5th of August. It was really heartwarming to see all the youth, all the young people just taking to the streets with their brooms, just wanting to help, entering into everybody's apartment, saying, what can we do? There were no doors, had no more doors in those houses anymore. People were just waiting for anybody who would help them clear the glass, clear the debris. I think these pictures, photos by George Azar capture the spirit of how the civil society in Lebanon just didn't wait for the government, didn't wait for any international organization. They just took to the streets and started working the day one. Now, on the level of the government, the Lebanese army divided the affected area into sectors, as you can see, and each sector, they appeal to the NGOs that each NGO takes one sector and starts working on it and starts assessing the damages. They also in parallel assess damage with volunteering engineers and with the army. But of course, they try to organize, but we don't have resources in the country because neither our municipality nor our government, with all the economic collapse and the impact of the failed political system and the COVID-19 and the economic collapse, it's very difficult to expect anything from the government. So on another level, the Order of Engineers and Architects rallied themselves. All the engineers and architects did a full survey of the damaged area that can be seen in red. You can see the port explosion area and the damaged Karantina, Mar Mikhail and Jemaisi areas. And they produced reports of the structural assessment and recommendations of what should be done, what should be consolidated, etc. On another level, the Ministry of Culture and the Director General of Antiquities, who are the main people who are responsible actually for heritage, for the heritage of the country and of Beirut, started the Beirut Assessed Cultural Heritage Action Plan for the recovery of the Beirut built heritage. And they contacted all the international organizations such as UNESCO, ICOMOS, ICROM, World Monument Fund, and ALIF, the ministries of culture in other countries to help us, because we really need all the help that we can get. And in parallel, they started their own damage assessment surveys, helped by a group of volunteering architects and architect restorers and structural restorers from the Center for Restoration and Conservation in Tripoli, alumni from the center, and all of us. I actually also am part of this group. We wanted to support the Ministry of Culture and the Directorate General of Antiquities to have for once a proper survey of our heritage, though damaged this time. The BBHR was launched, the Beirut Built Heritage Rescue, and we started to have a detailed damage assessment of all the damaged areas. And today it's almost on its way to be finished, the damage to the heritage buildings in the area. Based on this, we appeal to contractors to help us, give us in-kind donations of scaffolding and propping works. So you can see these really heartbreaking photos of beautiful heritage buildings that were completely damaged and that were being propped so that we don't lose them. Because what we are very afraid of is the rain season, which is in a couple of weeks. And when this happens, these are heritage buildings made up of wooden structures with the lime plaster, and this will be completely damaged by the rain. We have propped, maybe there are 80 buildings that are in desperate need of covering and propping. 40 of them are really high risk. We have covered around 25, I guess, but we have 15 or 20 waiting to be covered, and we appeal to anybody who could help us to do that. And in parallel, the buildings that have the red tiled roofs, the attics that have been completely shattered, were also given immediate emergency response to be able to reassess the damage, to cover the roofs, and if possible, either with TOT or with propylene sheets, so that we can pass the rainy season. As you can see here, we had support from UNESCO, from UNIFIL, Blue Shield, to be able to have emergency, and from ALIF through the IFPO, through the French Institute of the Proche-Orient, that we can have immediate covering for the damaged roofs. In also the Arab Center for Architecture, this was one of the gains of this unfortunate incident, is that our modern architecture, modern heritage architecture from 1930 to 1970 was included in the surveys. And the Arab Center of Architecture, where Dr. Arbid has just informed you, is doing their part, not only the assessment of the damage, but also preparation of a manual of good practice. And this is very important and very needed, so that the NGOs on the ground have guidelines when they attack such heritage buildings, the modern heritage buildings, also the traditional ones, and also capacity building for NGOs with UNHCR. And this is also very important. We are taking advantage of this catastrophe to have capacity building, so that we can handle our heritage in a better way in the coming future. The Beirut Heritage Initiative was born to have a financial hand, because many people didn't want to contribute to the government, to donate to the government. So this was the Beirut Heritage Initiative with the Fondation Nationale du Patrimoine, audited by Ernst & Young, produced a beautiful framework so that we can receive funds for our heritage buildings. And they immediately started working on the buildings that have lost their roofs. But also what's very important is that we are working on a long-term strategy for the rehabilitation of the whole damaged cluster, so that the rehabilitation is not piecemeal, and it takes into consideration the whole heritage clusters and the whole Beiruti heritage identity, including the public spaces, including the long-term vision, so that this time we really do once and for all a proper heritage rehabilitation project, not like what happened in Solidaire that also Dr. Arbid talked about. This is one example of an NGO that took a whole building. You can see it before restoration, before the blast, after the blast, and the works are being done. And even the people, it's amazing how the people are helping. There's an amazing civil society / NGOs / professionals. Everybody is in this together, and we are doing it together. This is just a few of the NGOs that are on the ground helping in the sheltering sector, rebuilding the houses together with international organization, and all under the Directorate General of Antiquities supervision. One thing that I would like to end with is the importance of the public stairs in these clusters that we are talking about. Beirut is a city by the sea, and it is a sloping city. So the stairs that are traditional connectors between streets have always served as a place where people hold debates, where people have theater performances, musical concerts. So they are a place where the culture thrives. And for us, maybe this is the easiest way to start to rehabilitate these stairs as public connectors, where the people will start feeling the vibe of this amazing cultural heritage cluster that has been completely devastated, but can be brought to life again through these stairs. And I hope the World Monument Fund will help us in this, and other donors too. Thank you. Vibe.
Thank you, Mona. I think just looking at all the logos of all the institutions that gathered their forces after the blast, this shows you how strong the the civil society is in Lebanon. And you were just talking about the cultural life in these neighborhoods. So Nadine, tell me, like, what is the role of the artists, and how do you think they can participate in the rebuilding of these historic neighborhoods?
I mean, I truly believe in the role of the artist in the new Lebanon that we're going to be able to create in everything we do, in any work of art that we do, any film, any play, any poem, any we're going to have to rethink the Lebanon of tomorrow. So we're going to have to propose in any work of art that we do the Lebanon that we want. We're going to have to imagine it also, because everything is going to need to be rethought. And not only because of the blast, but because of everything that we have been going through since this economical crisis that we have been facing. And I think that we're going to have to be much more engaged and much more involved in any decision that is going to be taken. Because unfortunately we have come to realize that we are on our own, that we're not going to have to rely on any government to think for us or to propose anything or to support any initiative. And what's been happening on the streets lately from the civil society, like Mona was just saying, is this proof that we're going to have to really rely on ourselves, and what they were able to achieve on such little time, and this collaboration between several NGOs, several institutions, several people from the civil society, volunteers, all of that. We have proven that we are able to think outside of the government. Which is not necessarily good, but at least for the time being, we will be only relying on ourselves to be able to do that. So as artists, I think we're going to have to play a big role in anything in the Lebanon of tomorrow that we are going to have to imagine.
Thank you. And I think, like, now the question is, where do we start? And what do we restore? What do we build? It's a very crucial question, especially in Lebanon, where after the civil war, for those of you who don't know, so there was those 15 years of civil war from 1975 to 1990, and there was so much destruction. And after that, there was a project called Solidaire that anybody who lives in Lebanon will hear a lot about, because this was a reconstruction of the downtown central district of Beirut, and that generated a lot of criticism. And so, George, maybe you can talk to us about that, about like, how can we learn from this experience of the rebuilding of downtown Beirut after the civil war, maybe not to reproduce the same mistakes for those very important neighborhoods of Gemaizeh and Mar Michel?
Well, I think we have to start working together. And I do believe in participation. There is this great movie by Fellini, and I cannot but think about it every day now, because it's called Prova d'Orchestra, and it starts with this wrecking ball entering the room. And before it does, you have people playing the music, but each one is playing something different. So there's cacophony. And then when the wrecking ball hits the wall, everybody is astonished, and they start playing the music together. So I think this is what we ought to do. And what I see happening already with NGOs, I think is a very good start. Now, I would like to answer Nadine's comment about hoping that maybe everything has to be in place. She said, and I understand why, as a Lebanese, she would want some order somewhere. But I think, for example, if you take Solidaire, everything was in its place, but it didn't work. Probably precisely because everything was in its place. There was no room for life to happen. And the lesson from these neighborhoods is that life happens. You know, development happens, progress happens. People go, people come, people stay. There are certain traditions and there is change. And we have to accept that. We have to accept change. And the young society, the young Lebanese society now is calling for that change. And once it is done, I think it will run. So I have no fears about that. So first, participation. Second, not to lose the opportunity now to draw a new master plan for the city. The master plan is very old anyway, and it's all about zoning and how much you can build. There's nothing about preservation. There's nothing about the particularity of neighborhoods. So you can build almost anything anywhere. And now is the opportunity. It's a sad opportunity. It's a sinister opportunity, but we have to take it. And we have to rebuild a connection with the sea. There are many people in the Beirut Built Heritage Rescue working on this issue and trying to think already. And you have a large group of universities working with the Order of Engineers and Architects now and thinking about plans for the city. And we have to give the young people the opportunity to draw them, dream them. We need more dreams.
And one of the fear right after the blast was that private owners of this historic house were going to sell them to developers for new high-rises building. And we've seen that happening a lot in the past. And this for very understandable reason, like when many people, many families live in one of these historic houses and they don't have the means to rebuild it, they may be tempted to sell it. So we've said a lot that there is a political crisis in Lebanon, but at the same time, was there any kind, can you tell us that the reaction from the official authorities, and did they prevent that to happen, or is it still a risk? Mona, maybe you can answer that, or George?
It was of course, people who have been eyeing these heritage buildings, developers, real estate developers who have been eyeing these heritage buildings before the blast, because we were suffering from disappearing heritage buildings because of the real estate speculation since the end of the Civil War. But immediately after the blast, they of course ran to the opportunity. And many talks were happening about people willing to sell, but also there were amazing cases where people who haven't had the money even to put their glass back on their windows and put nylon sheets refused to sell because of their attachment to the buildings. But in order not to have this happen, we appealed to the Ministry of Culture and to the Parliament to pass a law to suspend anything that has to do with the damaged areas and put it under study for a year that is renewable for another year. And the Order of Engineers and Architects, the Director General of Urbanism, pushed for that, and we had an urgent law that was passed only a couple of weeks ago, so that nothing would happen in these areas, even if the real estate vultures come. But we hope that a year is a very short time. We have to do this master plan that George was talking about, so that we convince people how we can preserve our heritage, but at the same time have a feasibility, economic feasibility.
So there was a cooperation between the civil society and the official authorities, and at least for 1 year, if I understand correctly, they cannot sell, like nothing can change. And this gives you the time, I mean, not very much time, but some time to protect the houses and to think about the master plan. Many of our viewers, I'm looking at the question at the same time, are asking like, okay, that's great, this role of civil society, but where is the municipality? Who is coordinating all of that? So George, can you answer that?
Well, we are not the country of coordination, so this is actually the problem. Even between NGOs, one has to say the truth. Even between NGOs, there are some overlaps, and of course, we need the organization. Now, I'm more in connection with the Directorate of Antiquities, not with all the Lebanese authorities, and I can say that there is a great job being done there. Now, when it comes to the municipality and the governor of Beirut and what happens on the ground, well, I think now it is more or less organized. Not much is done, but at first you would hear, for example, that an order was given to demolish a certain building, and then nobody knows where the order came from. So there was a little bit of a mess at first. But I would like to, if I may, jump again on the issue of the law. Mona mentioned the law. And there is a law that is in the parliament, and it has to be, I think it has to be passed, even though very slight changes have to be made to it. And this law is a heritage law. And it is a law that tries to do some sort of balance between everybody's right for heritage and people's own right to use their land or their property. And if not, then to have some compensation. So the law is very interesting. It's a complex law. And without a law, you can do nothing. I mean, of course, I also lament what I call the vultures, whether developers, some developers are very good. We should not always associate development with vultures because there is also sound development. But it is true that when money comes into the picture, then there is very little that can be done. You're talking about very, very large sums that people are ready to pay for a dilapidated old house. And sometimes what is unfair in the game is that you can build on the plot next door a tower with a view on the garden of somebody who cannot even renovate their house. So something has to be done to this. This is why this heritage law came. And I think we have to go always through the law. We have to have a new sort of social contract where private property is not the major issue, public good is the major issue, but then you have to be able to compensate people.
And do you think it's doable? Do you think it's doable given the current state of affairs in Lebanon to pass this law?
If some political change happens, it is very doable.
Okay, great.
I think also, sorry, Bénédicte, just one thing also to be fair, the governor of Beirut, after the fourth day maybe of the blast, issued a statement that he will not sign one demolition permit of a heritage building during his staying in position. So that is also a big gain for us because the view of the devastated heritage houses and the fact that they might be abused in this situation made him go to this statement, and I think that was a great gain. And also about the law, we now I don't know, the listeners might not know that we do not have in Beirut a law to preserve heritage except the decision made in 1933 under the French mandate. Imagine, that is the most modern law that we have to preserve, and it preserves actually antiquity up before 1700 and puts a very difficult framework to preserve what is post 1700. So this law is also today is a chance for us to push for the law. And with the impact of the blast, I hope even whatever political situation we get to, we have hopes for this law.
And something that was very striking to me, like so thank you, Mona, because I think that gives us hope that at least like nothing terrible will happen in the next few months. And so now we can focus on what's to be saved and what maybe need to be destroyed. And it was very striking in Josh's presentation how much of the destruction of downtown Beirut happened, in fact, not during the war, but after the war. And so who is going to decide that? Like, what do we need to save now because we've seen like there is a lot of destruction, and what needs to be kept?
We need to keep, go ahead, George.
No, sorry, Mona. Just a quick thing. I think we should think in terms of clusters, not only in terms of iconic buildings or individual buildings. We should think of neighborhoods, and master plans have to be made for not only for the city, but for neighborhoods, because then you can balance development with the heritage. We will lose the battle if we're only thinking in terms of preservation. It is impossible in today's Lebanon economic situation. It's impossible. Yeah, sorry, Mona, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, if we have to really succeed, other than, of course, fundraising, because with the little that we have and the little that we have lobbied for, we can save a building or two, a small cluster or two. Like we are working on 2 buildings with a stairway, but for 6,000 buildings. Or even 8,000 some in the initial survey, this really needs a major effort. But if we do not think of, if we have to choose, we choose a cluster and go with it. And maybe one cluster goes, one cluster remains. We have to see what really is worth keeping and is feasible to keep, because many houses, and I really think that the rain season is going to surprise us. And we are afraid some of the heritage buildings are going to really lose themselves because the wooden ceilings wouldn't be standing. Some of them are really have a lot of structural damage. So an assessment of a thriving, the possibility of having a thriving cluster is more feasible than saying, yes, we will have to rebuild everything, although we hope we can rebuild everything. But without money, we will not be able to do that. And it cannot be like years that waiting for money to happen. So master plan and strategy.
Thank you, because I think it's so relevant to see that the soul of Beirut is not in one building, in this grouping of buildings that that coexist with each other from different eras and that allow social life. And maybe from the audience, I have a question for you, Nadine. Oh, yes, please go.
No, I just wanted to say one thing that we have to be careful about is because some people are working under emergency situation because the rain is coming. What I'm very afraid of is that the transitional might become permanent if we don't. We have to be very careful, because this is very dangerous, because some of the reconstruction is being made very hastily because we are afraid of the rain season. So it's very important, like George was saying, this coordination between the municipality, the NGOs, the people who are working on the ground happens, and we have to be very careful about our ego problems, unfortunately, because this is what's happening, is when everybody wants to do the work and there's no, of course, there's always a great will, but sometimes this lacks coordination. So we have to be careful about, you know, the big cause. And to go back to what George was saying, God forbids I want everything to be in the right place. This is not what I meant. What I meant is this collaboration and this view, or maybe this way of imagining a more sustainable also city, a more green city, and this is something that we can also find. That's why it's very important that we maybe sometimes go back to the original building, to the original house, because some of those houses were actually built taking into consideration all of that ventilation and the sun orientation, and built in a way that is maybe more green than what the most modern green buildings that are built today. So all of that, and God forbids we don't want another Solidaire that is not very, that doesn't have a soul, that doesn't have a heart. It's the complete opposite that we're gonna need to rethink and build in that way.
And thank you. And we have a question of the audience about, like, how are people residing in these affected neighborhoods involved in the process of rebuilding? Of just the question I was asking, what is kept, what is going to be lost? Do people living in these structures want to restore building to their original form, or is there a desire to build anew with more contemporary architecture? Who wants to talk about that?
As far as the people are concerned, you know, because it's mostly NGOs and even the BBHR, what we do is, of course, the people come first, and we interview them, and we take what they want to say into consideration, and we anyway want to help them go back to their homes. So some people, you know, lost their house, their children's home, and their workspace. So the devastation is huge, and still they want to come back to their homes, and we will help them. But as far as I also wanted to comment on the sustainability before I forgot, because also the order, for example, the Order of Engineers and Architects is having European consultants help us with the when we rebuild, taking seismic conditions into consideration. So if an earthquake happens, these houses were never planned for seismic support. So this is also something positive that will be taken into consideration. Now, the people are very important, because, but the problem is nobody has money. We just want them to hang on to their homes, and they only want to somebody to tell them, yes, money is coming, you will have a home soon. You don't know, when you go into one of these houses and you see there are no triple arches, So the facade that is 5 meters wide of the main living spaces is totally empty, because obviously it was the part of the house open. There were only 2 pavilions in the middle, and now these people are open to the weather conditions. So sure, we want to involve them, but we need, after all, boys, we have experts. We need them.
Okay, so I think we are losing you, Muna, but unfortunately, this is a fascinating conversation. Unfortunately, we are already up to the end of our event, but what I think,
unfortunately, visit of the UNESCO.
Yeah, I just lost you at the end, Muna, but what I wanted to say is that, like, there are so many questions raised, the role of government, how can we help? Like, I think we all heard you that at the moment, the rain is coming, we need to protect those buildings, otherwise they're going to be lost for sure. So if you want to help, there are all these initiatives of civil society. We're going to put them on our website. Ask us all your questions. I think the priority for now is really to cover those buildings, then to work with the civil society. The community involvement is crucial. And us at World Monument Fund, we're also going to do that with George and Muna and Nadine to try to create a project that would involve like clusters and the community to really help preserve the soul of Beirut. So thank you so much, George, Nadine, Muna. There are so many questions. I think we will send you also the questions
Yes.
because we cannot go through them now, otherwise it will take 3 hours. But that has been enlightening. I hope for those of you who don't know Beirut, now you all want to go there and to support the Lebanese, because they are an extraordinary people and Beirut is an extraordinary city. If you want to know more about our activities at World Monument Fund, go on our website, wmf.org. You will learn about the next events in Heritage Now, as well as our programs, and you'll have all the information you need about Beirut. So thank you so much and have a great day.